required for you, but just for the completion sake, I'm just giving it over here. So we've got three subfamilies: Oncovirinae, Lentivirinae, and Spumavirinae. Lentivirinae is the subfamily which contains the genus Lentivirus, and within Lentivirus we've got two agents which cause HIV/AIDS, that is HIV-1 and HIV-2. Okay. So this is a simplified classification. Just to put it in context, HIV virus is an RNA virus, which is a single-stranded RNA virus. This single-stranded RNA virus is positive-stranded. Positive-stranded means if any RNA has got a same polarity as the messenger RNA, we call it as a positive-stranded RNA virus. It is an enveloped RNA virus, and it has got an icosahedral symmetry. So that's within which we've got Retoviridae family, which contains HIV-1 and 2. So that's the basic classification. Now we come to the historical perspective of HIV. In 1981, there were a lot of unusual cases of Kaposi sarcoma, which is a kind of a skin cancer, and a very unusual kind of a pneumonia, which was caused by Pneumocystis jirovecii. At that time, this agent was called as Pneumocystis carinii. It's a fungal agent. So it's very uncommon cause of pneumonia. So a lot of cases were being identified in US, particularly homosexual young adults. This disease was at that point referred to as, the new name was given, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, because people realized that it is some sort of an immunodeficiency which is happening, because of which these diseases are becoming more prevalent. So because of which this name, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, or AIDS, was given to it. But at that point of time, we did not know the cause of the disease. In 1983, the causative agent was isolated, and it was isolated for the first time in France, in Paris, and it was given the name lymphadenopathy associated virus, or LAV. In 1984, another group in US isolated the same virus, and this name HTLV3 was given in US. In 1985, first test became available for the diagnosis of this infection, and in 1986, the generic name as we know today was given to it, that is human immunodeficiency virus. Okay, so that's the chronology of events. Now, these were the two scientists in France who had discovered the virus first in 1983. That is Lou Montana and Francisco Senussi. Both of them later on was given or conferred with the Nobel Prize for Physiology and Medicine for discovering for this discovery of the cause of the agent responsible for HIV/AIDS, that is HIV virus. As luck would have it, another person, Robert Gallo, he had discovered the same agent, and he had given the name HTLV3 in the year after that, that is 1984. So he missed out on the Nobel Prize. So he was pretty unlucky. You have to discover something very unusual to have an impact on the human race, and the people who discover it first usually get the Nobel Prize. So he missed out. That's why you can see this sorry figure. It's pretty unlucky, man. So let's see the basic virology of this virus. It's a spherical virus which is roughly about 100 nanometer in diameter. It is enveloped. It has got the envelope contains the peploma, or the surface protein, which is referred to as GP120. This GP120, I hope you are able to see the cursor. This GP120 is exposed out from the envelope, and it is connected to the envelope by a stalk, which is referred to as GP41. GP stands for glycoprotein. It stands for glycoprotein. So GP120 is a mushroom-like structure which is jutting out, and it is connected to the envelope by a stalk, which is referred to as GP41. Inside the envelope, you can see another layer of protein, which is referred to as a matrix protein. It is called as a matrix protein, which is referred to as P17. P stands for protein, and 17 is a molecular weight. Inner to the matrix is, you can see, the core. This core is again made up of a protein, and it is referred to as P24. It's also referred to as a capsid protein, P24. P again stands for protein, and 24 is a molecular weight. Within the capsid are two strands of positive RNA, and they are exact copies of each other, and that's why HIV is said to have, or retroviruses are said to have, diploid genomes. They are said to have diploid genomes. And within this capsid, apart from the genome, there are three enzymes which are there: integrase, reverse transcriptase, and protease. Integrase, reverse transcriptase, and protease. So that's the basic structure of the HIV virus. So the genome is single-stranded RNA, positive sense, and it is diploid. Diploid means it has got two copies of RNA. Two copies of RNA. Okay. I hope the slides are visible and I'm audible to you. I hope so. Now, this is the scanning electron micrograph picture of the HIV virus. You can see these red dots. These are the HIV viruses which are attaching onto the host cell. This green big cell is the host cell on which the HIV virus is attaching. It's an actual image. So just to give you a context of relationship between the size of the HIV virus and our host cell. So just to give you some idea. Now let's see the genes. There are two types of genes of HIV. That's the genetic organization of the HIV virus. It's fairly complicated. It is not required at an undergraduate level. Just to put it in context, structural genes and non-structural genes. What do you mean by structural and a non-structural gene? This is a common theme that you're going to read in virology particularly. All the genes which when code for a protein which forms the structure of the virion, this is called as a structural gene. The rest of the genes which are not forming the structure of the virion, these are called as non-structural genes. These are basically involved in the regulation of the replicative cycle and other things. So the structural genes of HIV are of three varieties: GAG, POL, and ENV. GAG codes for two proteins, core and matrix, that we had learned earlier. Core is P24, matrix is P17, while POL actually stands for polymerase. So it contains, or it codes for various enzymes: reverse transcriptase, protease, and integrase. And the third gene is N gene. N actually is the short form for envelope. So this codes for the proteins which are studied onto the envelope, that is GP120 and 41. So these are the three genes: GAG, POL, and N. And then we've got a whole lot of non-structural genes. You are not required to remember the names. Just remember these are called as TAT, NEF, REV, VPU, VIF, VPR. VPU is present in HIV1, while instead of VPU, we've got VPX in HIV2. So that's the slight change in the organization of the genes vis-a-vis HIV1 and HIV2. Now, let's see the subcategorization of HIV virus. There are two types of HIV virus, HIV1 and HIV2. Almost all infections in the world are caused by HIV1. So that's the most common cause of HIV infection in the world. HIV1 type is for the serogroups. These are called as serogroup M, N, O, and P. This is just a continuity of the English alphabet. So it is A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M. So N आता है, N के बाद O आता है, O के बाद T आता है. So that's the continuity of the English alphabet. M actually stands for major. M for major. N stands for new. O stands for the outlier group. And then we've got P, which is the next letter after M and O, and thereafter we've got P. So that's how you can very easily remember. M is called as major because most of the HIV infections which are caused by HIV1 are caused by serogroup M. M is further subdivided into subtypes or clades. It is further subdivided into subtypes or clades, and these are referred by English alphabets A to K minus I and E. So there is no I and no E. So it is A to K minus I and E. In India, the most common clade or a subtype which is responsible for HIV infection in our country is basically C. Whereas in the Western world, B is the most common subtype of the clade. Okay. Now here is the comparison between HIV1 and HIV2. As I was mentioning earlier, HIV1 is present worldwide. So almost all HIV infections in the world are caused by HIV1. Whereas very few infections in the world are caused by HIV2. It is particularly restricted to the Western African countries. HIV2 is particularly restricted to the Western African countries. Okay. What is the origin? That's a very common question that you get. Almost all the HIV viruses, actually, if you talk about HIV1 and HIV2, they've risen from their counterparts, which are called as simian immunodeficiency virus, or SIV, of non-human primates. So they jumped the species, very similar to what we are seeing with SARS-CoV-2. SARS-CoV-2 basically was causing infection in bats, and it jumped the species into the human. Similarly, with regard to the HIV virus, HIV-1 actually is very closely related to SIV. SIV, as I said, stands for simian immunodeficiency virus of Sooty Mangabey. Serogroups I've already mentioned, or serotypes I've already mentioned, A to K minus I and E, whereas for HIV-2 it is further subdivided into A to H. In terms of transmission, HIV-1 is much more easily transmissible as compared to HIV-2. So HIV-2 is much less transmissible by the heterosexual route, 3 to 6 times lower efficiency of transmission by heterosexual route. Similarly, the perinatal transmission. What do you mean by perinatal transmission? Perinatal transmission is from the infected pregnant woman to her baby. So the effectiveness of transmission of HIV-1 is higher. It's roughly about 30%. We'll talk about this a bit later in detail. Whereas for HIV-2 is very low perinatal, that is mother to child transmission. Time to development of severe disease, which is referred to as AIDS, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, is shorter. It is about median 10 years with regard to HIV-1, whereas for HIV-2 it takes much longer. So if I ask this question, which is the most common cause of HIV infection in the world, what would be your answer? Quick answer, beta. Which is the most common cause of HIV infection in the world? HIV-1 or HIV-2? Quick answer चाहिए मुझे. Good. Pooja, Purna rather, HIV-1. If I ask the next question, which is the more severe cause of HIV infection, HIV-1 or HIV-2? HIV-1 or HIV-2? So again, the answer is HIV-1. HIV-1 is more common also and more severe also. You've asked a question, somebody's asked a question, what is this hyphen? Just to indicate that heterosexual transmission is 3 to 6 folds lower in HIV-2. Okay, so we are comparing with HIV-1, so I'm not giving any absolute number for HIV-1. So the heterosexual transmission rates of HIV-2 have been compared with HIV-1, and they are 3 to 6 times lower as compared to HIV-1, and that's why I put a hyphen over there. I hope it is clear to you. So this is an extremely important table which will answer a lot of questions that you might be having in your mind with regard to HIV. This is just to show the geographical distribution of HIV-1 clades. As you can see, India over here, C is the most common clade responsible for HIV infection in India, whereas if you see the rest of the Western world, particularly the US, B is the one which is most common. In Africa, it is pretty heterogeneous, a lot of different clades are circulating. However, in the Western world, Europe, as well as in case of US, it is the B which is the most common clade. So if I ask this question, which is the most common clade of or subtype of HIV-1 causing infection in India, what would be your answer? Quick answer. Quick answer. Am I audible? Beta, am I audible? Am I audible? So the most common clade which is responsible for HIV infection is HIV-1, serogroup M, clade or subtype C. So I hope it is visible to you, or I'm audible to you. Okay. Okay. Good. Good. Wonderful. So let's go on. Now this is extremely important slide that you need to remember with regard to the modes of transmission. I'll talk about the risk which is involved as well as the contribution to the total HIV infections which are occurring in the world, particularly in context of India. Now, there are 3 basic routes of transmission of HIV infection: sexual, perinatal, and parenteral. Sexual, perinatal, and parenteral. Parenteral ka meaning through blood or body fluids. Parenteral is further subdivided into blood transfusion, intravenous drug use, people who inject drugs for basically getting high on it, so they are addicted to drugs, and then we've got needle stick injury. While you are basically working in a healthcare setting, giving basically a parenteral drug, you get injured with a needle contaminated with blood or body fluid. Okay. Now, if you talk about sexual route, the risk of transmission of HIV infection by sexual route is 0.1 to 1%. Now, what does it mean? It means that if a person has got an unprotected sexual intercourse 100 times with a HIV positive person, 0.1 to 1 times out of that the person will get infected. So that's the risk. How much does it contribute totally to the HIV infection in the world is staggering 89%. 89%. Okay, so if I ask this question, which is the most common route of HIV infection in the world, your answer would be sexual route. And within sexual route, there are two routes, heterosexual route and homosexual route. Heterosexual route accounts for 85 to 86% of all HIV infections, whereas about 1 to 2% of all HIV infections are transmitted through homosexual route. So if I ask this question, which is the most common route of HIV infection transmission in India and the world, homosexual or heterosexual? Quick answer. क्या answer होगा बेटा? जल्दी बताओ. Very good. Please don't say homosexual route. Though the disease was first identified in homosexuals in US way back in 1981, it is not the most common route. But if you talk about the risk, the risk of transmission by heterosexual contact is 0.1%, whereas by homosexual contact is 1%. So it is 0.1 to 1% because of this range. Then is perinatal transmission. Perinatal transmission is from the infected pregnant woman to her baby. So the risk is about 30%. So what does it mean, the risk? If there are 100 mothers who are HIV positive and they all deliver a baby and there is no intervention involved in terms of prevention of transmission, 30 mothers will transmit the infection to their babies, while the rest of the 70 mothers will not, even if you don't do anything. Okay, and how much does it contribute to the total HIV infection in the world, particularly in India? It is 6%. So if there are 100 HIV infections occurring, 6 occur through this particular route. Blood transfusion. What is the risk of HIV transmission through contaminated blood? If somebody is transfused accidentally with an HIV positive blood, what is the risk that a person will get infected? It is almost 100%. So it is 90 to 95%. Okay, 90 to 95%. Because it is the whole unit of blood which is being transmitted, and if that blood is contaminated, you are short going to get that infection. But because we screen the blood for HIV infection, the total number of infections that the blood transfusion contributes to is just 1%. Okay, Priyanka has asked this question: why the risk of sexual route is 1%? Beta, it depends upon how much virus is there in the secretions, and the virus amount determines how effective transmission would be there. Because it is a tiny amount of virus present in the local genital tract during the act of sexual contact, the risk of transmission is less. So I hope I've answered, and that's why if you see the blood transfusion, the risk is almost 100%. Why? Because you are transmitting a very large amount of virus through the transfusion of the whole unit of blood, and then obviously there is no doubt the person will not be affected. So I hope you've got this question, got this right. Intravenous drug use, the risk of transmission is 0.6%. So if you are sharing needles, usually what happens is that intravenous drug users, they share needles. They cannot afford to buy fresh needles for injecting bloods. They form a group and keep on sharing needles. So if you inject drugs by these contaminated needles 100 times, 0.6 out of those 100 times the person will get infected. How much does it contribute? It is 2%. Needle stick injury, it is very important for us beta as healthcare workers. So if you get injured with a needle stick which is contaminated with HIV positive blood 1,000 times, out of those 1,000 times, 3 times the person will get infected. So 3 by 1,000 into 100 becomes 0.3%. But it does not mean that you have to wait for 997 injuries and then in 998 you will get infected. It could be the first instance itself where you get the transmission. Okay, so please try to understand this concept of risk. So it's a statistic. So it does not mean that 0.3% risk means you will get first wait for 997 injuries and then in 998 you will get infected. So please remember, it could be the first itself. Okay. So if I ask this question, what is the most common route of transmission of HIV infection? Please बताइए क्या आंसर होगा? Heterosexual. If I ask this question, which is the most efficient route of transmission of HIV infection, what would be your answer? Which is the most efficient route of transmission of HIV infection? बताओ बेटा, क्या आंसर होगा? Very good. Shabash. So it means you are getting it. Very good. Very good. Now, this is an extremely important slide. All of us are scared of HIV infection. These are the routes by which HIV infection is never transmitted. So it is not transmitted to casual contact like sharing food, coughing, sneezing, using a common telephone or a mobile phone, or through feces, urine, saliva, sweat, unless they are visibly contaminated with blood. They have no risk. Donating blood. If you donate blood, you are not going to get HIV infection. Sharing of toilets. This is a very common question. Mosquito ने bite किया HIV positive बंदे पे, फिर उड़ के मेरे को bite कर गया तो मेरे को HIV infection हो जाएगा? नहीं होगा. Because HIV is a very fragile virus. It doesn't survive outside very well. Sharing of swimming pools. So all these are the activities where the research has shown that HIV infection is not transmitted. Okay, I hope you got it. With this, now we'll turn our attention to the pathogenesis of HIV infection. Very interesting virus, and it will make use of the basic knowledge that we have developed during our sessions in immunology. So I'm sure you will be able to apply that knowledge that we have developed with regard to immunology over here. The primary receptor for HIV virus, unfortunately, is CD4. And please remember, CD4 is present on which cell? Cluster of differentiation number 4. Pick answer. हमने पढ़ा था बेटा. CD4 is mainly present on the helper T cells, or CD4 positive T cells. And helper T cells, we last time had understood that helper T cells are the most important cells of our acquired immune system. You cannot be alive if you don't have functional helper T cells. Small amount of CD4 is also expressed on macrophages. Okay, so majorly it is expressed on helper T cells, but small amount is also present on macrophages. So any cell which has got CD4 present on the surface, HIV virus is going to infect. So does the HIV virus infect all cells of our body? Yes or no? Quick answer do beta. Does the HIV virus infect all cells of our body? No, it will only infect that cells of our body, very good, which have got CD4 on the surface, and therefore it only infects helper T cells and macrophages. HIV virus, just to complicate things, also uses co-receptors. So first it uses a primary receptor, that is CD4, and then it uses a co-receptor to enter the cell. There are two types of co-receptors that you have to remember, and we will try to understand further. These are CXCR4 and CCR5. CXCR4 is present particularly on T helper cells, in addition to CD4, while CCR5 is present on macrophages in addition to CD4. Now, HIV virus, which uses CD4 and CXCR4, will only infect T helper cells. And such strains of HIV virus are known as lymphocytotropic strains or X4 strains. X4 comes from this word, CXCR4. Whereas HIV-1 virus, which uses CD4 and CCR5, it infects mainly the macrophages. These are called as macrophage tropic strains or R5 strains. R5 comes from the word CCR5. Okay, so there are two types of HIV-1 strains depending upon which host cell they infect: lymphocytotropic strains or X4 strains, which use CD4 and CXCR4, and R5 strains or macrophage tropic strains, which use CD4 and CCR5. Now, what is the difference? The HIV strain, which is an X4 strain, kills the lymphocyte once it infects, whereas the R5 strain of HIV-1 virus, which infects the macrophages, does not kill the macrophage, but keeps on multiplying slowly within the macrophage without killing it. So my question now to you is, and just apply your common sense bit over here, nothing else. Which out of the two viruses would be the transmitting virus? X4 strain or R5 strain? Transmission एक ह्यूमन से दूसरे ह्यूमन में कौन करेगा स्ट्रेन? X4 की R5? Excellent Mitali, excellent Pooja. Okay, so basically it is the R5, because जो है उसने सेल को नहीं मारा, इसलिए वो सेल दूसरे ह्यूमन को ट्रांसमिट करेगा. So R5 strains are the transmitting viruses, whereas immunosuppress disease cause कौन कर रहा है? कौन सा स्ट्रेन कर रहा है बेटा डिजीज कॉज? इट इज द X4 which is causing the disease by causing immunosuppression, because this is a strain which is killing the T helper cell. R5 is not killing the macrophage. So I hope you've got this question. Transmitting strain कौन सा होता है और disease causing strain कौन सा होता है, immunosuppress कौन करता है? So I hope you've got the point. Now, what is the pathogenesis in terms of HIV? Now, probably you would have realized, because of the destruction which is caused by the X4 strain in the T helper cell, and this destruction is not only a physical destruction, but also the Qualitative destruction. Amalya has asked a question. Sir, these strains are of particularly Yes, Amalya, I'm talking about HIV-1 only at this point. Okay, so it is HIV-1 only, and it could be any serogroup or clade. So whatever I'm talking about is specifically associated with HIV-1. Okay, I hope it's clear to you. So when the X4 strain infects the T helper cells, it physically damages the T helper cells, and therefore you got the decrease in the amount of T helper cell. In addition to that, the functional damage also occurs to T helper cells. Though they may not be physically damaged, functionally they are not able to carry out their normal function, that is immunoprotection. So because of this, the person becomes immunosuppressed. And HIV actually does not directly kill a person. HIV actually makes the person immunosuppressed, and the person develops subsequently infections with other organisms and malignancies, because of which the person dies. The person doesn't die directly by HIV. It is the immunosuppression which is responsible for the subsequent severe disease and death. So I hope you've got this pathogenesis right. Now this is the replicative cycle. So this is the host cell that the virus infects, and the exterior part of the virus binds to the host cell, and the virus which binds to the host cell is the receptor interaction which occurs between the GP120 of the HIV virus with CD4 and the coreceptors which is present in the host cell, and then it enters. Once it enters, it releases its RNA. Now it is a reverse transcriptase enzyme. The reverse transcriptase makes a complementary copy of the DNA from its genomic RNA, and this complementary copy is called as the proviral DNA, which gets integrated into the host genome. Then it is called as a provirus. So this is then called as a provirus. And this then directs the synthesis, transcription and translation of its own proteins using the cellular machinery. Components are formed. Many baby viruses are formed which are released from the cell. Okay. Okay. So this is the replicative cycle. So many viruses are released and the whole cycle gets repeated again. I hope I'm audible to all of you. Okay, so this is the natural course of HIV infection. Now, what is the natural course of HIV infection? This is an extremely important graph that you need to understand. When a person gets infected, so this violet line that you are seeing is basically the virus in the blood. Okay, the green line is the CD4 cell, and this purplish kind of or pinkish kind of thing is anti-HIV antibody. So when a person gets infected with HIV, immediately the virus multiplies in very large amounts. Okay, and the virus multiplies in the large amount, the CD4 drops. The normal CD4 count is roughly about 1,000 cells per microliter. So there is a drop in the CD4 count. At this point, you develop some sort of an immune response. This immune response controls the virus to a certain extent. So that's why the virus level falls. But our immune system is not strong enough to remove the virus completely from the body. Hence, this line will never go to zero. If this line were to go to zero and you would have removed the infection, which happens in most of the other viral infections, we probably would not have studied HIV infection in detail, because और इन्फेक्शंस की तरह HIV इन्फेक्शन होता और हम उस वायरस को जो है अपने इम्यून रिस्पॉन्स से हटा देते और हम ठीक हो जाते, बट ऐसा होता नहीं है. HIV infection persists. Once it establishes, it persists for the rest of your life. Okay, so please remember this. So therefore it never goes to zero. That's why it is not touching zero. So this is called as a primary infection. Thereafter, the virus keeps on multiplying at a very low level continuously for the rest of the life of the person, and there's a slow decline in CD4 cells. धीरे धीरे करके CD4 cells जो है decline होता है. There's roughly 50 cells per year का decline होता है if you don't give any treatment. And when the CD4 cells drop below a certain level, that is less than 200 cells per microliter, the person is said to be severely immunocompromised, and then the person is said to be suffering from AIDS. The person is said to be suffering from AIDS, that is acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. Acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. So AIDS is the last manifestation AIDS is the last manifestation of HIV infection. So somebody who's got AIDS, you will not, somebody who's got HIV infection, you will not say directly that the person has got AIDS. AIDS is the last manifestation of HIV infection. So are the two terms HIV infection and AIDS synonymous? Yes or no? HIV infection और जो AIDS है synonymous है? Yes or no? Quick answer beta. Other terms? No. Excellent. So AIDS is the last manifestation of HIV infection, and please don't say anybody who's got HIV infection has got AIDS. Okay, so please remember this. Now let's talk about primary or acute HIV infection. Most of the people remain asymptomatic in the acute HIV infection. Most of the people remain asymptomatic in acute HIV infection. Some people, they develop mild manifestations like fever, sore throat and lymphadenopathy, which automatically subsides. So these people mostly will never be diagnosed because these are very common symptoms and nobody gets himself or herself checked for HIV infection because of these common non-specific symptoms. So most of these will remain undiagnosed. Okay, and as I said, large number of people would remain asymptomatic. Roughly about 40 to 50% people will not have any symptoms. Those who have symptoms are very minor symptoms, जैसे pharyngitis, sore throat हो गया. मेरे को sore throat has got 1,000 causes. I will not go and get myself checked for HIV infection. Okay, and therefore most of the acute HIV infections would be missed. They would be missed. Then the person goes into what we refer to as an asymptomatic phase. You can see this latency. This is an asymptomatic phase. The asymptomatic phase. This asymptomatic phase is for median 10 years. Even if you don't do anything, the person will remain asymptomatic for as long as 10 years, even if no treatment is given. And decline in the CD4 cells, as I was mentioning earlier, about 50 cells per microliter, it keeps on falling. When the CD4 count goes below 200 cells per microliter, drops below 200 cells per microliter, then the person becomes severely immunocompromised. And then the person is said to be suffering from AIDS. So one of the definitions of AIDS is when the CD4 count goes below 200 cells per microliter, or the second definition is when the HIV infection is associated with severe opportunistic infections that I'm going to refer to later on. So these are the definition of AIDS. Okay. Opportunistic infections and malignancies, as I was mentioning, are the primary cause of death in HIV. Main cause of death in HIV/AIDS. Okay, so let's move on and have a look at the opportunistic infections. Now, the opportunistic infections, as the name suggests, or OIs in short, they are called. These are those bacteria which, generally speaking, would not cause infections. Only when the person is severely immunocompromised, they'll cause infection because they get the opportunity to cause infection, or if they are causing infection in immunocompetent people, they'll cause much more severe disease in immunocompromised person. Okay, so I'll divide these opportunistic infections into bacterial, fungal, viral, and parasitic, and all of these will be discussed in detail in your subsequent classes as and when these topics are covered. The most important bacterial opportunistic infection that you have to remember is Mycobacterium tuberculosis, which causes the disease tuberculosis. Please remember, as a golden rule, tuberculosis is the most common cause of death in HIV/AIDS in our country and all across the world. So if I ask this very simple question, what is the most common cause of death in HIV/AIDS? Quick answer क्या बोलोगे बेटा आप? What is the most common cause of death in HIV/AIDS? Your answer would always be what? Tuberculosis. Tuberculosis is a deadly, and HIV a deadly duo. HIV infection enhances the severe infection caused by tuberculosis. In turn, tuberculosis hasten the progress of AIDS. Okay, so they both actually help each other out in developing their own respective infections, or they are basically complementary in basically enhancing each other's infection. Other opportunistic infections include recurrent bacterial pneumonias, recurrent Salmonella septicemia, recurrent bacterial pneumonias, recurrent Salmonella septicemia. Then Mycobacterium avium, that's an atypical mycobacteria that you learn about later on. This particularly develops, this causes a severe infection, generalized infection, when the CD4 count is less than 60 cells per microliter. Then viral opportunistic infections include cytomegalovirus, HSV, JC virus, all of these would be taught to you in your respective classes. Fungal opportunistic infections include candidiasis, which causes esophagitis. It is one of the AIDS-defining conditions, candida esophagitis. Cryptococcus neoformans is another fungus which causes meningitis in HIV/AIDS. It is the most common cause of meningitis in HIV/AIDS. And then Pneumocystis jirovecii that we referred to earlier causes recurrent pneumonia, especially if the CD4 count is less than 200 cells per microliter. Protozoal infections include Cryptosporidium parvum, which causes chronic diarrhea. Any diarrhea which persists for more than 28 days is called as chronic diarrhea. Cystoisospora belliae is another protozoal infection which again causes chronic diarrhea. Another protozoal infection called as Toxoplasma gondii is responsible for causing encephalitis in HIV/AIDS, especially when the CD4 count is less than 100 cells per microliter. These are the questions that you get in your exams actually. Malignancies are all virus-associated malignancies that you get in HIV/AIDS. Again, it has got an infectious etiology. This includes lymphoma, which is caused by EBV, Kaposi sarcoma, which is caused by human herpes virus 8, and cervical cancer, which is caused by human papillomavirus 16 and 18. So all these malignancies and infections, these are the main cause of death in HIV/AIDS because the person gets immunocompromised. Now, these are certain salient facts which are pertaining to HIV infection that you all have to remember, beta. Once a person gets infected, ये आपको किताब में नहीं मिलेगा बेटा, आपने ध्यान से समझना है इसको. Once a person gets infected with HIV, the person is always infected. There is no way that you can remove the established infection. Once a person is infected, the person is always infectious. The person is always capable of transmitting the infection to the other person. There is a long clinical latency. You become infected with HIV, you remain asymptomatic for a long period of time, but you are always infected and infectious. And later on, after 10 years, you develop disease if you don't take any treatment. Occurrence of opportunistic infections and malignancies are the main cause of death. There is no effective vaccine as of now which is available for prevention of HIV infection. There is no curative treatment. We have treatment available which will suppress the virus and hence make the person symptom free for a very long period of time, but it will not remove the virus completely from the body. So when you stop the treatment, the virus is going to come back. So it is a palliative treatment and not a curative treatment, but the extraordinary advancements have been made in treatment. So if the person takes the treatment properly lifelong, the person's life can be extended to as long as a normal uninfected individual. So it is a major achievement with regard to the treatment of HIV infection, but nonetheless, it is not a curative treatment. Please remember, it is not a curative treatment. ये नहीं कि दवाई खाई, आपका वायरस सप्रेस हो गया, आप सोचो कि आप ठीक हो गए, दवाई बंद करी तो जो है वायरस गायब हो जाएगा. Virus is going to come back. So please remember this important fact. Okay. So I hope you've got these important nuances. Okay, good. Now let's talk about HIV infection diagnosis. What are the various methods for diagnosis of HIV infection? The mainstay of diagnosis of HIV infection is by detecting HIV antibody. That is the antibody that you develop once you get infected with HIV antibody. Various testing methodologies are available like ELISA. We've got various types of rapid tests which are available, and we also have got Western blot. So Western blot, please remember, earlier we were using Western blot for diagnosis of HIV infection. Now it is only used in select cases. Mainstay of diagnosis is by using rapid tests in a national program. Other tests include virological assays where you directly detect the virus or its component like HIV P24 antigen, detect the RNA or DNA by nucleic acid amplification test, and virus culture. But mainstay, as I said, is antibody detection. These are the ELISA tests. Just I'm giving some photographs, the ELISA tests. These are the rapid tests which are available, which you can do within a few minutes. This is another rapid test which is available, which you can do in few minutes. Another rapid test over here. Okay, this is a comb-based rapid test. All these we are doing in our lab, which we'll show once you come back to physically to the college. Western blot also detects the antibody, but the difference between the Western blot and other tests is that you can also detect against which antigen you are detecting the antibody. So you get the bands of antibodies against different antigens, and therefore you can not only determine the antibody against HIV is there. Rest of the test only tell the antibody is there for HIV antigen. Which antigen it cannot tell. Western blot can also tell which antigen you got from the antibody. Okay. Now, what are the NACO strategies? NACO stands for National AIDS Control Organization. What are the NACO strategies for the diagnosis of HIV infection? So let's have a look at that. There are various strategies for the diagnosis of HIV infection. Just a minute. Just a minute, I'm just seeing my screen, it is not working properly. So what are the strategies for the diagnosis of Ankit, you've asked a question. Why do antibodies fall? Because of the severe immunosuppression, antibodies against some of the antigens fall because of the same immunosuppression leads to the defect in the production of antibodies also. Okay. So let's talk about the strategies for diagnosis of HIV infection. Strategy 1 basically is used for safety of blood and blood products. You do only one test. If it is positive, you consider it as positive and destroy the blood which is being used for transfusion. And if it is negative, you use that blood. So this is for blood safety. Then we've got strategy 2, which is further divided into two categories. Strategy 2, which is further divided into two categories, strategy 2A and 2B. Strategy 2A is for surveillance purposes. Strategy 2A is for surveillance purposes. You want to know what is the prevalence of HIV infection, you do strategy 2A. You do as many as 2 tests. If the first test is negative, you take it as negative. The first is positive, you confirm it by the second test. If both are positive, you take it as positive. If first is positive and the second is negative, you take it as negative. Okay. Then is strategy 2B. Strategy 2B is for the diagnosis of HIV infection. Prasanna, I'm going to answer your question at the end. Okay, I hope it is okay with you. Let me finish with this. Strategy 2B is for diagnosis of HIV infection in a symptomatic person. So you do the first test. If it is negative, you take it as negative. If the first test is positive, you do a second test. If both are positive, you report it as positive. However, if the first is positive and the second is negative, you do a tiebreaker third test. So if 2 are positive, 1 is negative, you take it as indeterminate. If 1 is positive and the other 2 are negative, you take it as negative. Okay. In strategy 3, we do as many as 3 tests. If all the 3 tests are positive, you take the person as positive. If 2 are positive and 1 is negative, you take it as indeterminate. If 2 are negative and 1 is positive, you take it as negative. If the first test is negative, you take it as negative. So it's a fairly complicated algorithm. Please go through this algorithm. It is very important as far as your questions are concerned. Okay. If you get an indeterminate result, you have to call the person again after 2 to 4 weeks and then you repeat the test, and most of the cases of indeterminate results would be resolved. With regard to the diagnosis of HIV infection in special situations like in acute HIV infection. In acute HIV infection, the antibodies have as yet not formed because antibodies take about 12 weeks to get formed. So in such a case, you cannot detect an HIV antibody. This is called as a window period. So once a person gets infected, till the formation of antibodies referred to as a window period. So in acute HIV infection, virus is replicating, but the antibodies are as yet not formed. So in such cases, we detect P24 antigen or do a PCR. We can also do a viral culture, but nobody does that. So these are the only 2 methodologies by which you basically diagnose. This I'm not going to discuss. Monitoring of HIV infection. So you've done the diagnosis, now you want to monitor. You do 2 types of tests for monitoring of HIV infection. One is immunological test where you do count the CD4 cells. Very simple. Faster the disease progression, faster would be the fall of CD4 cells. And this is done by flow cytometry. Virological test, you measure the amount of the virus in the blood. Very simple. Faster the course of infection, higher would be the replication of the virus, and because the higher is the replication of the virus, the viral load would be more. So very simple, immunological and virological go opposite in directions. So faster is the course of infection, the faster would be the fall of CD4 cells, and faster would be the rise of viral load. Conversely, if the disease is being controlled properly, the CD4 levels would rise because immune system is not getting damaged, whereas the virus levels would fall. So they go in the opposite direction. So I hope you're getting the point. These are the various drugs that we have. This will be taught to you in your pharmacology classes. We give multiple drug regimes. You've got nucleotide reverse transcriptase inhibitors, non-nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors, protease inhibitors, fusion inhibitors, integrase inhibitors, entry inhibitors. All these are available, and all of these would be taught to you in your pharmacology classes. One thing I just want to mention is that you give combination therapy for HIV. You never give single treatment or single drug for HIV infection. You give a combination treatment for HIV because single drug resistance development becomes very common. So therefore, once you give combination treatment, then the suppression of the virus occurs better without the development of resistance, and it is a lifelong treatment which is given. It is not for 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, or 10 day. It is a lifelong combination treatment which is given. And each of the major classes of drugs that I talked about, they inhibit some sort of the point in the viral replicative cycle that we discussed earlier. Now we talk about the risk of transmission. I talked about with needle stick injury for HIV is 0.3%. Is 0.3%. Mohit, the HIV 1, 2 AB means the antibody detection is against both HIV 1 and 2. I hope it is clear to you. So the risk of transmission of HIV infection through needle stick injury we discussed was 0.3%, whereas for mucous membrane exposure it is 0.09% or 0.1%. So what is a mucous membrane exposure? It means the splash of the blood while collection, it basically enters your eye. Needle stick injury means the needle itself has injured you. Okay. Now suppose NAT beta का meaning होता है nucleic acid amplification test. Most common form of NAT is PCR, polymerase chain reaction. Okay, it's clear, Karthik? Now, what is the management of the occupational exposure? This is very important as doctors because we'll be practicing soon, and there might be injuries which are occurring. It's better to prevent them, but then they might still happen. So suppose you've got a percutaneous injury by a contaminated needle. So remove your gloves, wash thoroughly with clean running water. That's it. In case the splash occurs in the eye, in that case, you just wash the site with running water for at least 5 minutes. Okay, you can use water or saline, clean water or saline, and then you can wash. Okay, and immediately contact the physician for the next course of action. So this is an eye wash station where you can put a face and then the jet of the water would clean your eyes or flush your eyes, or else if this is not available, you can actually use your hands to actually flush your eyes. Jaise cheete maarte hain, you can do that. Now, what are the things that you are not supposed to do? Please remember this. Do not panic. Okay. The risk of transmission is pretty low, and if you take post-exposure prophylaxis for HIV, it becomes even lower. So don't put your injured finger in the mouth. Suppose you got injured in the finger, don't put it in the mouth because you will convert a percutaneous exposure into a mucous membrane exposure. Double exposure कर दोगे आप. Squeeze नहीं करना blood आपने wound से कि भैया virus को बाहर निकालेंगे squeeze कर करके. Never do that, because by squeezing the blood you actually enhance the transmission of infection because immune cells वहाँ पहुँच जाते हैं injury करके. Never use any antiseptic, bleach, alcohol, betadine, because application of antiseptic further irritates the wound and it further allows the immune cells to reach. So no, don't apply any antiseptic, don't squeeze the blood, don't put the injured finger in the mouth. Okay, we do the establishment of the risk of injury. Okay, and that depends upon किस तरह का आपका exposure था and also किस patient से exposure था. Okay, so I'll just hurriedly mention what is the exposure category: mild, moderate, severe. Mild exposure is mucous membrane पे exposure हुआ हो या non-intact skin पे exposure हो कम volume से. Moderate exposure means mucous membrane exposure or non-intact but large volume, or you've been having a superficial cut with a needle, with a solid needle. Severe exposure is called as EC3, wherein your percutaneous injury is there with a large volume or a deeper injury. Okay, so these are the different categories. EC1 to EC3, the risk increases. The risk increases. And then the source, जिससे आपको इंजरी हुई वो बंदा HIV पॉजिटिव था कि नेगेटिव था. So if you do the test of the blood from which you got exposed, many times you will not be able to trace that blood. But if you've got that blood available, if the person is HIV positive, you call that person low risk if the load is less. Suppose the person is asymptomatic, on history taking, the viral load would be less. High risk would be if the viral load is high, that is, if the person is having acute infection or if the person is having AIDS. In the early part of the HIV infection and the late part of HIV infection, the virus load is high. We saw that diagram, whereas in the latent phase, the load is less. Okay, and based on this, you create a matrix. Exposure code and the source code, and based on this you decide whether post-exposure prophylaxis is required or not required. So this is a matrix. I'm not going into details of it. Now once you decide to give the PEP regimen, post-exposure prophylaxis regimen, you give 3-drug regimen. This is a fixed dose combination which is available that you give. This is tenofovir, lamivudine and efavirenz. Isko in short may we call it as TLE, fixed dose combination, and this is to be given preferably, very very important for all of us to know, because we might get exposed later on in our occupational as an occupational hazard. Fixed dose to be given preferably before 2 hours of exposure, but never after 72 hours. Various studies have shown that if you get injured and you don't take post-exposure prophylaxis within the stipulated 72 hours, but after 72 hours its effectiveness is gone. So preferably आपने 2 घंटे के अंदर अपना एक्सपोजर लेना है, तो इमीडिएटली आपको रिपोर्ट करना पड़ेगा, but not later than 72 hours. Okay, not later than so you can take it within 3 days, preferably within 2 days, but not later than 72 hours. But not later than 72 hours. Okay, so I hope you've got this point. And this is to be taken for at least for 28 days, almost a month. It has to be taken. The treatment is to be taken for a month, 28 days. So with this, we are through with the basics of HIV infection. Yeah, Shashwat, you've asked a very good question. When you take a PEP, you can reduce the viral load, and therefore if the risk of transmission, let's say, is 0.3%, you make it negligible. You cannot make it 0, but you can decrease it to a negligible level. So nobody can say you can make it 0, but 0.3% can be further reduced to a very, very negligible level. Okay, I hope it is clear, Shashwat. Akshara has asked this question, sir, could you please explain again why R5 strain is transmitting? Now, Akshara, the HIV virus R5 strain, when it infects the monocyte or a macrophage, the virus, when it multiplies in macrophage or a monocyte in such a way that it does not kill the monocyte or a macrophage. Okay, so virus hides within the monocyte or a macrophage, and this monocyte or a macrophage can then transmit the infection to the next person. Whereas in case of HIV virus strain, the X4 strain in a lymphocyte, it damages the lymphocyte and kills it. So therefore the lymphocyte is actually not alive, it is dead. So the transmission cannot happen through that. Okay, so you need to have basically a cell in which the virus is hiding to be able to transmit the infection. I hope it is clear, Akshara. Any other question? We can take a few questions. Any questions? Somebody had asked a question, I've forgotten that question. I said that I'm going to answer it later on. Can you just repeat? बेटा repeat कर लोगे question? मुझे एक किसी ने question पूछा था, I've just forgotten that question. हाँ, कुछ latent infection में पूछा था. Can you come again with that question so that I can answer? हाँ, reason for asymptomatic phase. Very good. So what happens is that when the virus causes the infection, you develop some sort of an immune response. That immune response controls the replication of the virus to a very low level. So the virus is multiplying at a very, very low level because of our immune response. But our immune response is not strong enough to kill the virus completely. So therefore, it maintains the virus at a low level. Because the virus is multiplying at a low level, it causes a low level destruction of CD4. So it is a cat and mouse game. वायरस को हमने सप्रेस किया हुआ है इम्यून रिस्पॉन्स से, लो लेवल पे है. क्योंकि हमने सप्रेस कर लिया वायरस को, आप इम्यूनो कॉम्प्रोमाइज नहीं हुए अभी. एट अ till about 10 years you maintaining your immunocompetence, but because धीरे धीरे करके CD4 cell मर रहा है because of the low level of multiplication of the virus, when your CD4 goes below 200 cells per microliter, now you become sufficiently immunosuppressed to develop AIDS, and that period of cat and mouse game takes about 10 years if you don't take treatment. Is that okay, Prasanna? Okay, now Purna has asked this question, what are CRFs? Very good question. CRF stands for circulating recombinant forms. Circulating recombinant forms, Purna, are the recombinations which happen between the clades. Sometimes, as I said, multiple clades are there, A to K. So what happens is that if a person is infected with multiple clades in a single person, they can recombine and can form a mixture of a clade in the same virus. So you can form an A-B clade or a BC clade. So these are called as circulating recombinant forms. These are not pure clades but mixtures of clades. Is that clear, Purna? Yeah, absolutely right, Prasanna. It is a cat and mouse game between the virus and the immune response, which ultimately HIV wins if you don't take treatment. Even if you, when you take treatment, your life is prolonged. You've got a symptom-free period, a productive period, but ultimately, again, the virus wins. But it does not mean that you'll not take treatment, because treatment improves your life and improves the longevity to a normal, uninfected individual. But the amount of virus which is present, if it is not contaminated with visible blood, is extremely negligible, and that's why it doesn't have the potential to transmit the infection unless it is visibly contaminated with blood. Is that clear, Arvachis? What are the skin and mucous membrane immunodeficiency? Samay nahi aaya beta mujhe. What is this? Skin and mucous membrane immunodeficiency. I could not understand your question, Dipesh. In that graph, beta, it means that you start to get infections of the skin and mucous membrane, like you will get thrush. In a woman who's HIV infected, initially you don't get esophagitis, you will get candidal vaginitis. Okay, so these are called as opportunistic infections, which are primarily involving the skin and the mucous membrane. And then you get deep-seated infections when you develop severe immunosuppression, like Mycobacterium avium infection, Mycobacterium tuberculosis infection, recurrent salmonellosis, recurrent pneumonias. This is what we mean. Opportunistic infections involving primarily the skin and the mucous membrane, and the ones which are involving the deeper organs and tissues. So it is a continuum. It starts with the superficial infections, and when you become more immunosuppressed, you get deeper organ involvement. Is that clear, beta? Is it clear, Dipesh? Most commonly, Prasanna, the tests that we do are rapid tests that I had shown. These are the most commonly done tests in our national program. We don't do ELISA commonly. ELISA is mainly done for diagnosis of HIV infection in blood banking, for blood safety. For individual, most of the times we are doing rapid tests, because the rapid test can be performed within 30 minutes and they're easy to perform. You can give the report there and then without losing the person to follow up. Is that clear, Prasanna? So with this, I think you've gained something out of this session. I know it was a big session. I would love to take more questions from you. Yeah, there's one more question coming from